Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsan ila yawm al-din. Amma ba'd. So we'll get into the discussion inshallah, and then if there's time for questions, we'll try to answer some of your questions. So this is a presentation that's been developed by Sheikh Mufti Faraz Adam, and we'll try to be using that to go over it. So what is zakat? Right? So that's the first thing that we start with. Linguistically, it means purity, praise, growth, and blessings. Right? So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses it for purifying oneself. Right? Zakatun nafs, tazkiyatun nafs. Right? It comes from the same. So that's where it gets it from. In Islamic law, it means تمليك بعض مال جزما عينه الشارع لفقير المسلمين لله تعالى. To give a fixed amount of specified wealth to a needy Muslim for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So why is it called zakat then? When zakat literally means purity or praise or growth, because it purifies the wealth. When a person gives the wealth that they are required from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give to the needy, then this purifies the rest of their wealth. Otherwise, that wealth remains impure. And whenever something is impure, then it has an impact. So if a person doesn't discharge their zakat, then it will have an impact on the rest of their wealth. Similarly, growth, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when a person gives charity in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grows it, right? It increases. And so that's the impacts of the wealth of giving zakat. Zakat is established in the Quran in multiple places. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in multiple places a similar verse, but the verse that's quoted over here, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة, and establish prayer and give the zakah. I don't know if I actually started with the tahmid, etc. So I'll just review it for my own benefit. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya wal Mursaleen Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsan ila yawm al-din. Amma ba'd. Okay, and so in the Quran, this ayah comes multiple places. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Salah and zakah were actually obligated together. However, salah became salah became active. The Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims started to perform salah even while they were in Mecca, whereas zakah only because it was not possible to distribute zakah while they were in Mecca, and so zakat only started becoming active within the Muslim ummah after the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina. However, they come together, right? They come together, and there's scholars have given reason for that. In the Sunnah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ has told us in part of a longer hadith, and Allah قد افترض عليهم صدقة في أموالهم تؤخذ من أغنيائهم فترد في فقرائهم. Allah has made it obligatory for them to pay zakat upon their assets, and it is to be taken from the wealthy amongst them and given to the poor amongst them. Right. So this hadith is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ gives some instructions to the great companion Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he sends him to Yemen as a governor. And so the Prophet ﷺ teaches him this, gives him these instructions, right? So zakat is supposed to be taken from the wealth of the wealthy from amongst the community and returned back to the poor from amongst them, right? So why do we have to pay zakat? Number one, it's a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That's the first and foremost importance that we should understand with it. Number two, it purifies the soul from greed and wealth from impurity, right? So when a person gives their zakat, then it purifies the soul from greed. And normally naturally when a person believes they own something, that they would want to remain attached to it. It's something that they enjoy and they consider it their own. But it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it a responsibility upon us to give. So it promotes circulation of wealth, right? In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Allah has given preference to some people over other in wealth, so that those that have more give it back to those that don't have as much, and then they become equal. So it's the right of the needy, right? There's a hadith to the effect that if everybody was to distribute their zakat, then there wouldn't be a needy person left in the world. It bridges the gap between the affluent and the needy, right? That's again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives as he likes, and there's wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it. Reduces inequality in amount of wealth between the rich and the poor, right? So see, these are some of the benefits of zakat. The virtues and admonitions, right? The example of those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah is like a seed of grain, which grows 7 spikes, and each spike is 100 grains. And Allah multiplies His reward for whom He wills, and Allah is all-encompassing and knowing. Right? So whenever we give something in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we spend in the path of Allah, zakat or non-zakat, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases its reward manifold. And so we should spend freely. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, the poet says about him, لولا التشهد لولا لا في التشهد لكان لاؤه نعمي. That if it wasn't for the fact that in ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, he has to say la ilaha illa in there, and that's the only time that we would hear la from his mouth, meaning that the poet in praise of him saying that when he was denying that there was any other God besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would be the only time that he would say no. Otherwise, his la would also be a na'am, meaning that he would be willing to give. So the Prophet ﷺ would give freely, and especially in the month of Ramadan. So we should try to emulate that sunnah. We pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us tawfiq. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ did say that besides zakat, there is also a responsibility in a person's wealth. And that's an issue of sadaqah, giving in charitable avenues and areas, even if a person has discharged their zakat. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us Allah destroys interest and gives increase for charities, and Allah does not like every sinning disbeliever. And then in another verse Allah says, and those who hoard gold and silver and spend it not in the way of Allah, give them tidings of a painful punishment, the day when it will be heated in the fire of hell, and seared therewith will be their foreheads, their flanks, and their backs. It will be said to them, this is what you hoarded for yourselves, so taste what you used to hoard. Allah protect us from these wa'id. Those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah by night and by day, secretly and publicly, they will have their reward with their Lord, and no fear will be concerning them, nor will they grieve. Right, so what are the conditions for zakat? The conditions for zakat is, number one, that a person has to be a Muslim. Right, even though it did come across as an interesting story about a non-Muslim in the time of the British governing India, that he would actually discharge zakat from his wealth, even though he wasn't a Muslim, and he had so much yaqeen on his wealth being protected because of discharging zakat, that there was actually an instance where some people came and told him that his house was being burned because there was a fire in the locality and it had spread. And he said, no, my house will not be burnt. And he was certain to the extent that when the fire was put out, then he found out that his house didn't burn. And he said, well, I've discharged zakat just like the Muslims do, so I have yaqeen, interestingly. But anyway, that's not in order to actually pay zakat, to give zakat, a person has to be a Muslim. Similarly, to receive zakat, also one has to be a Muslim. Number two, a person has to be an adult. Number three, a person has to be sane. 4, owner and possessor of the wealth equaling to nisab, which we're going to be coming to, and owning nisab amount after a lunar year. So what is nisab? Nisab is based on two universal precious metals, gold and silver, right? They've been known as universal currencies throughout, and that's what zakat is based off of. Right? There's 4 areas where a person has to pay zakat, either on gold and silver, or its equivalent in cash nowadays. And then that which results from them, and that which is connected to them, even though it is not in the form of gold or silver, would still be something that would be zakat, and which will come to under the discussion of zakat on gold and silver. We'll discuss business, merchandise, and stocks and shares, etc. These are also connected to the discussion of gold and silver. But besides that, there's on land, on produce, right? That what's known as ushur, and on animals that zakat would have to be given. So those are 4 things: gold, silver, ushur, which is on produce that's produced from a land, and animals. So over here it tells us that the nisab amount for gold is 87.48 grams, and silver is 612.36 grams. So what does that mean? It means that a person has to have this many grams of gold in their possession in order for that to become something that zakat has to be paid on. So if a person owns less than 87 grams of gold, they don't own any other wealth, meaning any other wealth that zakat has to be paid on. So no gold, no silver. Besides this gold, they don't have any silver or cash or what I spoke about, the produce or the ushur. Then they only have gold, then it would be required that they have 87.48 grams of gold in order for them to have to pay gold. So if they only own gold, then this is the amount of gold they would have to have. If they have 87.48 grams of gold, then they would have to give 2.5% of that. Silver, in the same context, if a person only has silver and it has 612 grams of 0.36 grams of silver, then they would have to, that would be an amount that would have to be, that they would end up having to pay zakat on. Now, nisab refers to this amount, right? So now it tells you if you only possess gold, then you would use the gold nisab. But if you possess mixed assets, right? Mixed assets means that a person has some gold, some silver, some cash, right? Then some business stocks, then they would actually use the silver nisab. Now, when we're talking about the gold and silver nisab, if there's a very big variance between the gold and silver nisab, right? The current price for 87.48 grams of gold is, and this is, just a quick Google search to help you to find a gold calculator. 87.48 grams of gold, today's price is $6,114.56, right? So that's that's what 87.48 grams of gold are, its prices today. And if we look at silver, silver is at $612.36, right? So $612.36. That's the amount for silver, right? So you can find, just Google search gold calculator Canada, and you'll find different sites, and they basically help you to understand this amount, right? So now, if a person owns 87 grams of gold or 612 grams of silver, now 612 grams of silver, as we said, today's price is approximately $612. I think that price is kind of long. Oh, sorry, the price is $626.11, right? That's the price, right? Not 600. That's the price of silver. So if a person has $626 in their savings, then that would result in them having the amount now, that they would have to pay zakat upon. Now, zakat is not compulsory on them yet, right? Zakat is not compulsory on them yet. If we look at these conditions for zakat, you'll see the last 2 points: owner of the wealth equaling nisab. So now when a person owns that amount of wealth, now they've fulfilled one condition. The second condition is that they have to now keep that amount or more than that amount for a whole lunar year. So if a person owns, just say a person has $1,000 in there, the day that they got they got $700. They would be now a possessor, an owner of the wealth equaling nisab. Now their zakat year starts, and they have to wait an entire year. If they remain above the $626, right, for an entire year, they keep increasing, right? From 700, it goes to 800, to 900, 1200. By the end of by the time the next year comes around, the same date next year, they have $2,000. Now they're going to have to pay 2.5% on that $2,000. Not that, every month they were getting $100 more, so now every month they're going to pay zakat. No, it doesn't work like that. The day that they hit that, they became the owner of that nisab amount, which was the price of silver when it was a mixed asset. Then they would actually now start calculating a zakat year, and as long as they remain above that, they would now remain in a position to have to pay zakat once 1 year completed. So let's give a more example that might make it a bit more easier. Last year on the 1st of Ramadan, Ahmad got $1,000 as a gift from his parents, and on that same day he ended up getting a job, right? So now he's got $1,000. He received $1,000 from his parents, and he has now met that he's a Muslim, he's an adult, he's sane, and now he's also become an owner of the wealth equaling nisab. So he became Ramadan 1441. We're in 1442 right now. So Ramadan 1441, last year Ramadan, 1st of Ramadan, he got $1,000. Now he became the owner of the nisab amount of wealth. He still doesn't have to pay zakat. Now, because he got this job and it was a simple job, he was only getting $100 a month, right? This year on the 1st of Ramadan, he had $2,000. He had spent $200 and he had $2,000 in his savings. And now he's going to pay zakat on the $2,000 that he has, because he was the owner. He became the owner of the nisab amount last year on the 1st of Ramadan. That continued to be the case throughout the year, and on the 1st of Ramadan this year he had $2,000, and so now he's going to pay 2.5% of that. Same example, Ahmad gets $1,000 from his parents on the 1st of Ramadan last year. He now owns. He's not an owner of the wealth. Ramadan goes by, Shawwal goes by, Dhul Qa'dah goes by, Dhul Hijjah goes by. In Muharram, 4 months later, Ahmad decides to buy a new phone, and he spends his $1,000. And so he buys this new phone, but because Ahmad is very particular in calling his parents, and so now he's got no more money left. He's spent all of his money, and he doesn't have any money left. And Muharram has come around. So now he has bought this phone. He's got $0 in his savings. His zakat year is broken. Now, next year Ramadan comes around. If he has no savings, he doesn't pay any zakat. But let's say 4 months later, when he spent his money on that phone, right? And unfortunately, it's actually fathomable that a person would spend $1,000 on a phone nowadays, but nevertheless, right? So he now has a phone, and it's Muharram. Now, a month later, his parents feel sorry for him, and they're like, "Oh, Ahmad is such a good kid. He always calls us. He bought this new phone, but he's always particular in, calling us." So they gave him another $1,000. Now, in the month of Safar, he got $1,000. Now his zakat year has started from Safar. 1st of Ramadan comes around, he's not going to pay any zakat. Why? Because 1 year hasn't passed, right? His zakat year got broken because he spent all of his money. Now the next year has come around. When Ramadan came, he didn't have a whole year's amount on that. A year hasn't passed on that nisab amount that he got in Safar. So now he has to wait for the next year Safar to be able to pay that. But can he pay it early? He can pay it early if he wishes to, right? He thinks, oh, I'm not going to remember by Safar that I have to pay, so I want to pay it in Ramadan, but I'm going to pay it knowing that I still have 4 months or 5 months left before I'm actually responsible for paying. He can do that, right? So this is, a year having to pass on that wealth, right? So if the year passes, and again, as long as that person didn't dip below, they're fine, right? So cycle of calculating zakat. The day you own the nisab amount after deducting liabilities, pencil this Islamic date down in your diary. So now remember, there's an issue of liabilities, what you owe, right? What you owe is also going to be taken into consideration when you're calculating your zakat. So Ahmad, if he is a student, he has OSAP loans. He got $1,000 from his parents, but he has to pay $500 in OSAP loans. So now he's going to calculate, okay, he got $1,000, but $500 he owes, so he has to deduct his liability. He's got to pay that, and now he only has $500. So he doesn't meet the nisab amount. He's not the owner of the nisab amount. But okay, Ahmad, got $1,000 and he only owed $100. So now he still, he gave he calculates, right? I own 1,000. I owe 100. Deduct that. Now he has $900. Okay. Now he's still above the threshold. He's going to have to calculate he's going to have to note down his Islamic date for his zakat year. It makes no difference whether the wealth increases or decreases during the year, as long as he doesn't go below the zakat amount. Remember that, the nisab amount. 1 lunar year, if you possess the current nisab amount after deducting liabilities on that very same Islamic date, you must pay 2.5% of your wealth as zakat. This process will continue unless you have, number 1, wealth equaling less than the nisab amount. 2, all of one's wealth is lost. Right? Zakatable assets. What are the things that a person will have to pay zakat on? Gold and silver, cash, business stock, agricultural produce, animals and livestock. So the last two were the ones that I said were agricultural produce, that's ushur, and animals and livestock. Because those two don't generally apply to most of us, we're not going to go into those discussions. Even though Mufti Faraz has graciously put them in this presentation of his, but we're going to stick to the first three because those that really matter to us. Non-zakatable items, jewelry besides gold and silver, right? So if a person owns a platinum ring, that's not zakatable, right? If a person owns, a diamond, that's not, zakatable, right? If they own a diamond ring and they're responsible for paying on the diamond amount, but they're responsible for paying on the other gold or silver that's holding up the diamond, right? Same thing with pearls, right? Precious stones, right? If a person has jewelry with precious stones in it, the precious stone itself is not something that you pay zakat on. But the gold and silver, as the actual gold and silver, you would pay zakat on. Cars and vehicles, properties on lease, electronic appliances, household appliances. These are not things that a person has to pay zakat on. In the Hanafi fiqh, you do have to pay zakat on all your jewelry, whether you wear it or don't wear it, right? As I mentioned yesterday, that different fuqaha have different jurists have, there are some differences between the madhahib. So if you follow a particular madhab, you should be careful in finding out that is according to the Hanafi. So gold and silver and cash, right? It's zakatable. A lot of it, and what's not zakatable? The gold and silver for personal use, right? White gold on gold content. Oops. Okay, so sometimes it might tell me that the internet connection is a little unstable. So just bear with me at the times. Right, gold plated. So the gold plated issue is that you're not going to pay on base metals that have just a gold covering or silver covering over it. That's what plating is. But if you have gold content within it, then that gold content itself is going to be something that a person has to pay zakat on. So now the best thing to do is to take any jewelry that a person has. Jewelers generally help. I used to have contact with there's a jewelers downtown, Q Jewelers. It was owned by Muslims. I haven't had contact with them for a little while now. So I don't know what the current state is, but they had expressed before that they would be willing to, for free of charge, evaluate and calculate the gold and its price for any Muslim sister or Muslims that needed to. They would just be able to take it in, they would weigh it and figure it out for them and tell them. So that's the easiest way of dealing with jewelry that you might have, right? So cash in hand, banks, coins, notes, etc. That's all going to be something that a person is going to have to pay zakat on. Zakat on business stock, right? Zakat is compulsory on one's business stock, right? So if a person has a business and they have stock, so commodities, refer to those items purchased with the intention of resale, right? That they're going to have to pay zakat on them. Zakat will be calculated according to the retail price of the goods. Zakat is not compulsory on real estate purchased with the intention to lease out, right? So if a person buys a house with the intention that they're going to rent it out, then they're not paying zakat on the actual property, right? That's not something that they have to pay zakat on, right? So there's still more to come into this in regards to this discussion of zakat on business. But it says over here at the bottom, one will add the value of gold, silver, cash, and the total value of goods, and then give zakat 2.5%. We came across earlier on a slide that when you have mixed assets, then you go according to the silver nisab, and you would just add all of it together and then take 2.5% out of that. So in a partnership, every partner is responsible to dispense zakat on his percentage of shares. I remember coming across a question, a couple of months ago, where somebody had asked me that if can the business take a zakat on its own? No, the business is not a separate entity; it's owned by people. So the owners themselves are going to be responsible. There could be a situation where a person is a business partner and doesn't have to pay any zakat because they don't meet the nisab amount. So or they don't meet the conditions. So that's possible. So just because a person is involved in business doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to have to pay zakat. They have to remember the same criteria, because as I said earlier, these are discussions under the gold and silver points of zakat that we discussed earlier. And so you have to have that nisab amount. Just like the nisab amount applies to gold, to silver, to cash, it's also going to apply to in the business situation, like what we have over here, right? So valuating business stock. If a person has a business, then if they have finished goods, then it's at their sale price. And if they have unfinished goods, right, they have goods that are still going to be made, manufactured, but they have all of the items for that, then they're going to value it at the market price, right? That's what's going to be the case for businesses. Some common transactions that people might be involved in: ijara and diminishing musharaka schemes. This is what, if people are doing Islamic home financing, they would probably possibly be in some of these transactions. These are not considered as debt, therefore no future payments at all can be deducted from zakatable assets, right? If a person is in a ijara or musharaka scheme, then generally whoever you are doing it through, they will have their own muftis, and they will have their own Islamic scholarly panel. So you can always find out more in this if this is not making sense to you through them. Deposits. Money deposit for safekeeping or given to another party for guardianship is zakatable. What does that mean? If you give zakat to somebody, if you give some money to somebody to hold on to, right, whether it's in a bank or to a friend or somebody else, you've deposited for safekeeping, then you are responsible for giving that zakat. Just because you don't have it with you on hand doesn't mean that you're not going to have to give it. That will again apply with when you any wealth that you are the owner of and you have access to, right? You have access to, you have control over and you have access to, then you are responsible for paying zakat on it. This comes under the question of, if people have savings, different types of savings, right? If you have company pension plans, for example, then the situation comes up. There are different fatwas, and I know these are challenging issues sometimes. Again, if people have personal situations, they should always find out more from a mufti or from a scholar directly, right? But the general rule that I've kind of pointed out is one that is easier to follow. If you have access to wealth, you can take out that wealth, right? Meaning that even though it's a company pension scheme or it's a company savings plan or something of that nature, even if you have access to that wealth, even if you have to pay tax on it, it means you have access to your wealth. It's your ownership, and you own it, and you have access to it. You are responsible. If you're the complete owner of it and you have access to it, then you have to pay zakat on it, which means you'd have to add it to your other assets and then pay zakat on it, right? Down payments. A purchaser is not the owner of the funds forwarded in a down payment. Thus, money given as a deposit in a down payment is not subject to zakat, right? If a person is already, because they've already paid that money, they're not going to be required. Zakat is not payable on insurance premiums. Benefits. Zakat is payable on the beneficiary of working tax credits, child benefits, and other forms of social security allowances. If one possesses any of these when calculating zakat, they'll be added to one's gross assets, right? So you got to keep in mind that you got to keep that nisab issue in mind, right? Any wealth that you own, right, it also has to be something that it meets. It's not owning wealth is not enough to have to pay zakat. You have to have the nisab amount, and you have to have that nisab amount or more for an entire year. So if people get child tax benefits, that becomes that's the parent's ownership. The parent is responsible for that, and now the parent becomes the owner. Just because they got that doesn't mean they have to pay zakat on it. They have to own it, and they have to have meet the nisab amount, and that nisab amount has to remain with them or more than that for an entire lunar year, right? Debts, right? So somebody owes you money. Now what happens? Do you have to pay zakat on that? Just like if you deposit some money in safekeeping, you would have to pay zakat on that. If somebody owes you money, then you are going to have to pay zakat on that, right? So there's three types of debts. Strong debt, right? Meaning that a person knows for a fact that they're going to get that money back, then they must pay zakat on the amount that he has lent out, right? So if you've paid money out, and you know that you have access to it, you can get that back at any time, and you know for a fact that you can get that back, you're going to get that back, then you have to pay zakat on it, whatever that amount happens to be. If it's a weak debt, right? This refers to receivables arriving without an exchange of tangible goods, right? For example, employees' unpaid wages, right? So if there's an employee, they haven't been paid for whatever, whatever month. Now, just say you calculate your zakat on the first of Ramadan every year, and the first of Ramadan happened to fall on the month of in April, during the month of April, and you did not get your wages for the month of March, for example, right? Now, when you're calculating your assets, you think, okay, I didn't get my March's wages yet, and now I'm calculating my zakat. Do I have to include that because I normally get it, but I didn't get it this month? No, you're not going to include it because you haven't been paid it yet, right? Unpaid rental for landlord. If a person's a landlord and they are expecting rental income, but that rent hasn't been paid to them, like that. Outstanding mahar payment, right? People, a couple got married and the man promised to give a certain amount in mahar and he still hasn't paid his mahar yet. For Allah's sake, you husbands that haven't paid your mahar, for Allah's sake, pay it. You're responsible for that, right? Some people, unfortunately, this is a cultural issue, a very big problem in our communities. People will promise mahar amounts and then they don't pay it, right? It's not right? We should be careful with that, right? So sometimes years go by, right? 20, 30 years, right? Sometimes divorces happen. I've had to deal with cases where divorce happens and the mahar wasn't paid. And now, there's a situation that I had to come across not too long ago where, a couple of years into the marriage, the divorce took place, the mahar wasn't given, and now the ex-husband is trying to get the wife to forgive the mahar. That's totally wrong, right? The mahar has to be paid. So anyway, if a woman hasn't received her mahar, she doesn't have to pay zakat on that, right? Outstanding bequest payments, right? If a person passed, somebody in a person's family passed away and they were entitled to a share of their inheritance, but that inheritance wasn't distributed. That's another major issue within our community. I know of cases where a person passed away, and members of that family, the inheritance wasn't distributed, and now some of the the progeny, some of those that the deceased had left behind, even some of them passed away, right? And the inheritance still hasn't been distributed, and and so that's very challenging. Why do we have these situations, right? Inheritance should be distributed immediately, right? So if a person is owed, an inheritance amount, but they haven't received it, that's considered as a weak debt. Zakat will not be compulsory in a weak debt receivable until and unless one gets receipt of that asset. Zakat is not compulsory on such a debt for the previous years it was outstanding, right? So in any of these cases, a woman was owed her mahar, 20 years have passed by, the husband still hasn't given it, right? Or 10 years have passed by, the husband still hasn't given it. So when she does get it, finally, maybe he's listening right now and he finally thinks, okay, you know what, I should be a little bit, brighter about this. I'm going to have to answer to Allah on the Day of Judgment. And he finally goes to, after this, and not yet, you should be careful because Maghrib time is coming soon. But, if he has the money at home and he decides, okay, goes and gives it to his wife. Now, does the wife have to calculate 10 years of zakat? No. She only got the money now. She's only responsible for adding it to her assets right now and then figuring out if she has to pay zakat. The bad debts receivable, the bad debt, right? A bad debt situation, right? It's a situation where a person is owed money, but they're not getting it, right? They're not getting it and they don't have any hope in getting it, right? Because it's becoming of that nature. There's two possibilities. Either the debtor acknowledges that the existence of the debt. And now, so the person that owes the money, they actually acknowledge, yes, I do owe you some money. And in a situation, not the ability to pay it, or they don't have the ability to pay it. They're solvent or insolvent, right? However, so acknowledges existence of the debt, then the debt is not excluded from the creditor's zakat liability. However, if a creditor is able to release his debt from his debtor despite his acknowledgement, it is not liable to zakat. Right? The person tried to get it out. Okay, I have to pay zakat on this. I don't have enough wealth by itself to pay it. Can you please give me the amount that you have to give me? The person keeps saying, yeah, tomorrow, next day, another month, give me one more month, give me another, couple of months, give me another year. Now the person realizes, not able to get it, they don't have to pay zakat on it. If the debtor even denies outright the existence of the debt, then there's no way that they're going to get it. So they don't have to pay any zakat on it. Right. So short-term liabilities, right? The total amount of so short-term liabilities which need to be paid within 1 year. The total amount of short-term liabilities will always be deducted when calculating one's zakatable assets. So, for example, people that have fixed mortgages, right? Then they will calculate 12 months payments from that, because that will be something that they will have to pay. But long-term, they have open. What's beyond that, they're not going to calculate, right? So span over a number of years, and they have, payment plans. So in that situation, they're only responsible for understanding their payments and not more than that, right? The amount one needs to pay in the course of 1 year will be subtracted, not more than that, right? So that's when it comes to liabilities, right? Debts are deductible from your zakatable total if they are to be repaid in full within the next 12 months. Right? So something you already owe, right? Something you already owe, not something that is going to become your responsibility later on. So you cannot calculate your phone bill for the next 12 months because you haven't used your phone, or even though you have a contract, you're not going to be allowed to add that to as a liability, right? But something that you already owe, you purchased a house, or you purchased a car, or you purchased a sofa from the brick, and now you have that sofa at home and you have payment plans. Now that's what you're talking about as a liability, or other liabilities that you may have, right? Debts which do not have to be paid in the next 12 months are not deductible, right? If debts are payable by installments, then 12 months debt is deductible, right? Deductible liabilities, outstanding, not future, basic living expenses which have not yet been paid. If a person owed their landlord for the last 5 months, they haven't paid it, then they have to pay. That's an outstanding, but not future, right? You can't pay your utility, you can't subtract your utility bill for a month that hasn't happened yet. Goods purchased on credit, you have taken receipt of goods but not paid for them yet, and fully intend to pay the debt. Outstanding salaries and payable service fees, unpaid dowry to one's wife, personal loans, commercial loans, right? So zakats on shares, right? If a person owns stocks and shares, then if they've been bought to resell them, right? A person buys that share to actually resell it. That's the whole reason for buying that share. Then they have to pay zakat on the entire amount, right? Entire holding is subject to zakat plus any dividends received. But if the person purchased the zakat to hold on as an investment and generate dividends, zakat will be levied on the dividends and percentage of zakatable business of the zakatable assets of the business, right? So now, because this person became a shareholder, right? A shareholder, if they purchased the share with the intention of, okay, whatever dividends I get out of that share, that's why I purchased the share. Now they've become an owner of that company, and now the rules of partnership that we just went on, in a couple of slides ago, they're going to be applied to this individual, even though it's a very small share, right? Even though it's a very small amount, they're going to have to pay, right? So that's when it comes to zakat on business, right? So on shares, sorry, right? So now whatever that company is producing, even if it's in a raw form or in a completed form, they're going to be responsible for having to pay zakat on that, because they are, according to their percentage, right? They're going to be responsible. So, right. So these are, we're going to, in the interest of time, if you have issues if you have stocks and shares, then maybe you can look at this and figure it out, what you have to pay. If, a business asset is going to be the fixed assets, right? These are not zakatable, right? So machinery, building, furniture, right? But the current assets, example, cash, stock and trade, receivables, these will be zakatable, right? So one will pay zakat on the percentage of current assets in ratio to his share value. For example, Zaid purchased $1,000 worth of shares in company XYZ. 40% of the company's assets cover machinery, furniture, cars for use, etc. 60% of the company's assets are in the form of stock in trade, cash, receivables, gold, etc. Zakat will be on 60% of the $1,000, which is $600. 2.5% of $600 will be zakatable in addition to the dividends received. Right, so that's how you calculate. You're going to have to look at whatever stocks you have and figure out what is the fixed assets and what are the current assets, and then figure that out. Pension schemes, right? Right. So remember that there is different types of pension schemes, and you're going to have to figure out. The rule that I gave is one that is a little easier to follow. If you are the owner of wealth and you have complete access to that wealth, then you are responsible for paying zakat on that. Whether it's RESPs, whether it's RRSPs, whether it's anything else, right? So you're going to keep that in mind. So here's where it brings in agricultural produce, which again, we're not going to discuss. And he also brings in discussion on livestock, which again, we're also not going to discuss. Right, now, how does a person discharge their zakat? In order to discharge their zakat, they have to make the one that they're giving zakat to owner. Until that ownership does not take place, they have not fulfilled their zakat. Now, if they decide to use an agent, like many people like to use humanitarian organizations like Islamic Relief or other organizations like that, they decide to give their zakat to that organization. Remember, they haven't fulfilled their zakat until that the receiver actually receives the zakat and becomes owner of it. So now if I decide to give my wealth to Islamic Relief, and until Islamic Relief doesn't give that money to the person that they're giving it to, my zakat is not fulfilled. Now what happens if I give it to XYZ person to give it to this to the recipient, and the XYZ person destroys the wealth? My zakat is not fulfilled, because this person was not responsible for, I used them as an agent, I used them as a medium, I used them as a means. I was personally responsible for giving my zakat in the hands of the one that was deserving of it. I decided to use somebody in the middle, that's my choice, right? When I decide to use that person in the middle, that's my choice. If the wealth doesn't get to that final poor person or the needy person, I am still responsible for my zakat. You have to remember that, right? So that's and there's 8 categories of poor of those that can receive it. Out of that, the poor and the needy are the general people, right? Remember, the following cannot receive zakat, because zakat has to be, tamleek has to happen. Tamleek can only happen when you give it to a person. If you give it in general welfare projects, then it's not, one person hasn't become owner. Tamleek did not take place. The organization itself is not fit to receive zakat. Islamic Relief by itself is not fit to receive zakat. Islamic Relief takes zakat and gives it to the ones that are deserving of it. So you cannot just hand it over to Islamic Relief and your zakat is done. No, Islamic Relief cannot attain zakat. Hospitals, right? Madrasas, construction projects for masjids, hospitals, etc. Descendants of Abbas, Harith, Ja'far, and Aqil radiallahu anhum. A rich person, one's husband or wife, one's parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, one's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc. A non-Muslim, you cannot give employees wages through zakat. Prisoners, right? Again, unless somebody is if there's a person who is a needy person, who is not one's wife or husband, one's parents or grandparents, etc., or one's children, etc., they can receive it, right? So if there's a prisoner who is a needy person, then they can receive it, right? So, but just by being a prisoner, they cannot receive it. That's the point, right? So this was a little bit. So at the end of it, what a person will do basically is calculate their assets, calculate their liabilities, subtract their liabilities from their assets. Whatever remains after that, if it's remains above the nisab amount, and they know that they've had that amount for the whole year, lunar year, they're going to have to give 2.5% of that, and they have to make sure that somebody becomes the owner of that. So that's a little bit on the fiqh of zakat. Hopefully, inshallah, that was beneficial for everybody, and hopefully that makes it easier for us to understand this discussion. So because a lot of people like to take out their zakat in the month of Ramadan, That's why we decided to make sure we just went over it. Again, this is on YouTube. If you want to revise it, you're welcome to go there on the Islamic Center of Oshawa Youth Group channel, ICOIG. You can go there, and inshallah, and you can find this presentation that we just went over there, and hopefully, inshallah, will be benefit. Because of Maghrib time being very close, we're going to stop here, inshallah, and we'll conclude with a short dua as we did yesterday. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك ربنا وتعالى يا ذا الجلال والإكرام اللهم لك الحمد كما أنت أهله فصلي وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد ما أنت أهله وافعل بنا ما أنت أهله فإنك أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة اللهم ثبتنا على الإيمان ومتنا على الإيمان واحشرنا يوم القيامة مع المتقين مع الإيمان. O Allah, forgive our sins, have mercy upon us. All of those that have passed away, O Allah, have mercy upon them. O Allah, 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 pass, Allah, those that have passed away, Allah, Allah, forgive them, have mercy upon them. Allah, all those that are sick and ill, Allah, grant them cure. Allah, remove this pandemic from the ummah. Allah, help us to discharge our zakat. Allah, Allah, accept our fasting and our qiyam. Allah, help us to use every moment of this month in the best way possible. Protect us from wasting our time. Allah, Allah, help us to schedule our time and to schedule that which we should do, Allah, and to fulfill and to be determined, Allah, and grant us the ability to fulfill that which we plan to do, Allah. Allah, make it easy for us to do an abundance of ibadah in this month. Allah, help us to connect with your Quran. Allah, Allah, have mercy upon the ummah wherever, Allah, wherever suffering is taking place. Allah, remove that suffering. Allah, Allah, remove that suffering. Allah, have mercy upon us and the entire ummah. Allah, all the khair which the Prophet ﷺ requested from you, grant us that khair through your mercy. All the shar which the Prophet ﷺ has to be saved and protected from, save us and protect us from that shar. Whatever we ask for, Allah, grant us it through your mercy. Whatever we should have asked for and didn't ask for, Allah, grant us that through your mercy. Whatever we desire in our hearts, if it's good for us, Allah, grant it to us. If it's not good for us, replace it with that which is beneficial for us. اللهم رب ارحمهما كما ربيانا صغيرا اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا ولأساتذتنا ولمن له حق علينا ولمن أوصانا واستوصانا بالدعاء ولجميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين. Just a reminder that from tomorrow we'll be starting our short Quran, gems of the Quran, just some Quran, some things we can understand from the Quran, inshallah. So that will be tomorrow, starting tomorrow, every day before Salat al-Maghrib, approximately half an hour before Salat al-Maghrib. You can, inshallah, join in on there. That will be starting from tomorrow, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Can you get the PowerPoint? Sure, you can. If you can just email me, imam@ashwamosque.com. I will send the PowerPoint to whoever wants it, inshallah. Right? So imam@ashwamosque.com. Right, and inshallah I'll send you the PowerPoint, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.